Enlightenment philosophers and many others were writing about this idea of obligation is creating well-being, sounds like it's wrong, because it seems like you're denying yourself freedom. But this idea, this word freedom, if you look at the etymology of that as well, it came from this idea to be able to have the ability to love and care for other people. So if you are somehow denied your liberty to care for your friends, to care for your family, to care for your environment, because you're locked in a factory 16 hours a day in the Industrial Revolution, that's not freedom. That's to be able to express your obligation brings you joy. And so you need to be able to think about how we're going to create a system where rights bring us the freedom to be able to exercise our obligations, our reciprocal nurturance with nature, and to bring us joy, to bring us prosperity. So how do we do this? What happens in movements? What happens when you try to create rights of nature? Rights are not going to be allocated by society until the society is sort of ready. And so we need to change the culture. And we look at gay marriage in the States right now and how it's at the US Supreme Court. And that took decades of advocacy, hard work by a lot of people. It didn't just sort of show up in one case, to start to change the culture so that most Americans are now comfortable with this idea. And when that happens, then the laws will change. The same thing with women's right to vote. They worked for decades to try to change that. In slavery, decades to try to change that. And then we saw the things start to change in the law. So changing the culture through education, through alternative modes of living, to show people what other types of system that we could have, incredibly important to be able to change the laws. And so when we talk about alternative modes of living, there are new communities that are sprouting up. Transition towns are one example, where communities are coming together as people and saying, you know, we want to change how we live, create a new system to substitute for the old. And so they're doing things like creating alternative currencies and getting off the grid, and having the types of relationships that we don't have nowadays, real community-based relationships where they're nourishing the earth. And this idea, Schumacher was an economist who wrote Small is Beautiful, which is a wonderful book. And he said that the only logical economic system is to live in concert with your local environment, to live with the land, to live in a way, live small, and to understand how you're living on a day-to-day basis, and know where your food comes from, and know where your wastes go. Because if you don't know that, then you're creating, again, more separation. You want to build the relationship, and these types of communities are a great way to do it. And so if you're getting these communities going, and you're getting the culture changing, then that's going to help push the laws. And some communities are going to be further ahead than others. And so we're going to be able to start to change laws in some communities, which will create a little bit of a snowball effect with others. And then once the laws start to change, then it captures the people who may not have agreed before, but start to follow the law and see, oh, you know what, this is better. Giving rights to women to vote, maybe I didn't like that before, but you know, they seem to be making good decisions. So let's go along with that and build these types of relationships. Christopher Stone wrote Should Trees Have Standing back in 1972, and he outlined, well, what do rights look like for nature? What the heck are we talking about? And he said several things that as advocates, as attorneys, as citizens, we need to think about when we talk about rights of nature. It means that if nature is injured, then that's their rights that are injured, and they get to be recompensed, they get to be restored. Nature gets to be restored in a way that it comes back to nature. That it isn't just money paid to somebody who owns property, but money goes to be able to make the property whole. And money goes to be able to prevent things like this from happening. And systems change to respect nature's rights. There are several places around the world where this is starting to happen. I'm just going to go through these quickly. New Zealand, there was an agreement between the Crown Government and the Maori last August to be able to recognize the Wanganui River and its tributaries as having their own rights. Bolivia has passed 2 laws with respect to the rights of Mother Earth and how to implement that. And the World's People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth back in April of 2010 came up with a universal declaration, an international declaration signed by over 35,000 people there, or they raised their hands, they didn't physically sign it, saying that Mother Earth has a right to life and a right to exist and a right to habitat. And that's working its way through the UN system right now. Ecuador changed its constitution, the first country to do so back in 2008, to recognize that nature has rights. just in the way that Christopher Stone talked about. And they've started to apply that, and I think the lessons learned there are pretty instructive. And I apologize for going quickly through the slides because I want to make sure that we have time for questions later. So, and again, you'll get a copy of this. So, in brief, there was a court case last year, the first time that this constitutional provision was applied, and the judge found in favor of the river, which had been injured by some road building activities, and said the river's right to flow, its constitutional right to flow, has been injured and it needs full restoration, which is great. We were really happy about that. Fast forward to a couple weeks ago, there's a massive mine that's being built in one of the most pristine biological areas in the world in Ecuador. It's being proposed. And advocates, friends of mine, had challenged it in court, and my organization wrote an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, to support that. And unfortunately, a couple weeks ago, the lower court judge said, no, this is something that's good for the country, it's good for the people, and I'm sure that the government agencies will do a good job overseeing it. And I can't tell you how devastating this mine will be. Species will go extinct, waterways will be destroyed forever. It's a real, if anything was built for the constitutional provision to protect the rights of nature, it would be this. So why? Why did this lower court decision happen? Again, it gets back to this idea that we have to recognize the rights of nature, but not in isolation. We have to change the system that we live within, and we have to recognize that that system as a whole, this juggernaut, is going to consume natural resources. I just did it, quarter in the jar. To be able to change rights of nature, to recognize rights of nature, we have to take away the rights that the economic system thinks it has, and we need to do that by, again, building an economic system that recognizes relationships. And Donella Meadows was a wonderful, incredible person, a scientist at MIT who developed systems theory with some other folks there. And she wrote that the ultimate goal of a system, a living system, is to protect itself and to isolate itself from danger. And that's what this economic system is doing. It's not maximizing profits for the people, or to even give wealth to ever more wealthy people, but it's to make itself bigger and stronger and bigger and stronger. And that's what its goal is. And we need to be able to recognize that we invented this system and that we can invent something else, something that builds true prosperity among people and with the environment. And communities across the United States are starting to pass bylaws, ordinances there, bylaws here, that try to do this, to try to do both things, to recognize the rights of nature and to say that corporations who want to come in to a community and do these types of things, drill, mine, hydrofrack, take groundwater and bottle it, when the community doesn't want it and will destroy the community, they're saying no in these bylaws. They're saying we don't want that. Our nature has rights, and corporations don't have a right to do this in our community. So they're attacking the economic system as well. The biggest city to do this so far was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And you can see a lot of the language from the Ecuador Constitution is reflected in here. And they said that waterways have a right to thrive and be healthy. And they also said corporations don't have a right to hydrofrack. And in Pennsylvania, where this ordinance was passed, a lot of communities are starting to pass ordinances in the hope to change the state's constitution and reflect this language there. And in Vermont, I've been working with some folks there to be able to create resolutions at the local level to ask the legislature to amend Vermont's constitution. Vermont's a much more progressive state than Pennsylvania. It's a little easier to do it there. And they're addressing the corporate issue more directly. Their legislature has already passed a resolution saying that the Congress and the country should amend the Constitution to say that corporations don't have these types of powers to control us. And last night, I've been working on a bylaw in Santa Monica, California, which is a different model. These other communities had something bad coming in, mines, oil and gas drilling, these types of things. But in Santa Monica, they didn't really have that. They had a sustainable city plan that they wanted to protect after Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision that granted corporate powers in the states. They wanted to protect their sustainable city plan. They wanted to protect their sustainability goals. So I've been working with them for the last couple of years to draft a bylaw that has rights of nature in it, that recognizes the right to people to a healthy environment, and says that corporations don't have the right to be able to tell citizens how to live in their community. And you can see some of the language here that they pass, that citizens have a right to clean air and to clean water, and the right to healthy food systems that come locally. And there are some enforcement provisions in here too. And so this is an incredible model for communities, again, to start to create something new, something where we say, this is prosperous, this is how to live in a prosperous way. We're going to do that. We don't want this. We don't want what we have, but we want something else instead, so we can replace it. So what can we do here in British Columbia? What are the options? And so I was working on Santa Monica. I was kind of curious, what could we do in Canada to be able to apply some of these concepts? The Charter of Rights and Freedoms has some language in Section 7 that talks about right to life, liberty, and security of the person. And there are some people who are bringing lawsuits to try to get in there this idea of human right to a healthy environment. And there's one case that's wending its way up the courts right now that may be that case because it's an incredibly polluted area. But that's going to take a while. It's going to be a few more years before something comes out of that. And there have been several cases so far where this has been tested and they've failed. But it's still possible that this might go forward. The courts have left some room. The Constitution Act has a provision that says that the provinces, and I'm sure most of you know this already, the provinces have the ability to make law for the municipalities and decide what types of bylaws municipalities can pass and what types they can't, and how citizens can become involved. So that's a little more circumscribed than what you can do in the states. The municipalities tend to have a little more power, not necessarily always, but the provincial law here in BC allows municipalities to pass laws, to pass bylaws addressing waterway pollution and waterway flow in what I think is a really broad way. And you can see the language up here, and the idea would be to pass a bylaw where you articulate the rights of waterways, as Pittsburgh did, as these other communities have done, the rights of waterways to be clean and to flow, and to be able to take that language and then apply additional, more specific language with respect to some other thing that might be coming in that the community might not want, such as a mine, etc. And we've seen a number of things, such things, that we've heard a lot about: Northern Gateway, Kinder Morgan, the mines of Raven up in Comox, and Ajax more in the interior. I mean, these are just examples of the types of projects that are coming through. They impact waterways, many of them. And so is there an opportunity for a municipality to pass a bylaw to say, you know what, if you've got an oil pipeline coming through, our waterways have a right to be clean, and this is not going to come through unless you can absolutely 100% assure us that nothing will ever happen, which of course will not, they cannot do. But the idea would be to start to try to use that, and certainly there are ways to be able to get at it in places like Comox, which I'll show you in just a second, which has much more direct impacts to local waterways. But there are a lot of opportunities, I think, for municipalities to start to look at this. So waterways are one area where municipalities can pass bylaws. Nuisance certainly is another. And this is, again, without provincial approval. I didn't even look at things that required provincial approval. Another way is through public health, and to be able to pass a bylaw that protects the public health in some way. There was a bylaw passed that was court tested and won on a cosmetic application of pesticides, saying that in this particular town the citizens couldn't cosmetically, to make their yards look better, apply pesticides because it was a public health issue. It was something that the city wanted to protect its waterways from, etc. And that won. So there are public health opportunities, and this is a photo of a graphic of the Ajax mine with an open pit and tailings and all kinds of devastation right next to a community, and there's no way that the waterway and the public health is not going to be affected by this. So how to tie these types of tools together, the tools that municipalities have to pass bylaws to say, our community has a right to be healthy, our community has a right to clean waterways, and we're going to pass a bylaw, a law that says that. People have to comply with it, and anybody who wants to impact our community has to comply with that. And like Santa Monica has a sustainable city plan, Vancouver has a greenest city plan. And there's ways to be able to pass bylaws, as they did in Santa Monica, again, to start to create this new vision. So it's not just about saying what you don't want. I don't want this mine, etc. But what you do want. I want a sustainable city. I want to get my greenhouse gas emissions down. I want to get my ecological footprint down. I want healthy food grown locally, healthy organic food grown locally. And I want to be able to articulate that perhaps in a bylaw that says I'm protecting public health, to be able to exclude types of food that might be a problem. Or protect your waterways. So in Vancouver, the Greenest City Plan has drinking water targets. protect those drinking water targets with a rights of waterway provision that protects the watersheds around Vancouver, which have been logged heavily, so protected from further logging. There are so many opportunities to be able to think about how to use bylaws to be able to advance a new type of society. And then finally, I'd mentioned the Raven coal mine because it gets back to this idea of advocacy again. And they've got a coal mine proposed there that will directly impact local waterways, so there's opportunity potentially for a bylaw along those lines. It will certainly impact public health. Perhaps there's a bylaw opportunity there as well. But it's immediate. This is happening right now. There's an environmental impact document that's coming out this month, and then people have 50 days to look at that, and the minister may make a decision by this fall. And there are a lot of citizens doing this work and commenting and showing up at hearings and looking at this environmental document. But it's really important as advocates to not get yourself boxed in to these processes that other people dictate for you. And this is something that I see over and over in the States more and more in my career as an environmental advocate. I see really good, dedicated people locking themselves into these processes that have been set up to keep them in a box. And we need to say, you know what, these are our communities, this is our planet, this is our larger Earth community, and we need to be able to decide how we're going to advocate. So sure, advocate on this environmental process, but also step back and say, what are my other options? How can I use this to be able to, I'm going to use this tool like a municipal bylaw and other tools to be able to protect our waterways and our health. So action plan, again, just sort of summing up, we need to be able to, what we're trying to do is we're trying to guide the evolution of culture, so we can guide law, so we can guide culture. It all feeds back onto each other over and over. And how do we do that? What's our focus? What's our criteria? This idea of relationship-based prosperity. Prosperity is not something that's all about us. It's about taking care of others and having that reverberate back on yourself. And that's where the real joy and prosperity come from. And how can we do that in this particular instance? How can we achieve that? It's by taking on these separations, these breakages that we've seen in the relationships between each other and the environment, by creating rights for nature, and to be able to recognize that nature has rights in a way that we can have a relationship, a true relationship, not a master-servant relationship, but a true one-on-one relationship with nature. And this movement has to include, it's not just about rights of nature, as we saw in Ecuador, it has to include breaking down this idea of the economy as something that has rights, and corporations that having rights. And we need to recognize the economy has to serve us. And so what do we do? And to go back to Donella Meadows again, and she said it's a very simple thing. You just have to keep doing this over and over. You have to point at the failures. You have to say, this is loudly and from a mountaintop, this is what the problem is. The economy needs to serve us. Nature needs to have rights. We need to be able to build relationships and communities that recognize these types of relationships and help each other. And we need to keep coming from that place ourselves. We have to walk the walk. We have to live lightly on the earth. We have to try to build communities like transition towns where people are starting to grow their food locally, and to help each other and to build things that will create sort of a community that recognizes that they live as citizens in this larger earth. And we need to, play politics. We live in this world. We need to be able to elect leaders and really work the electoral system to be able to get leaders that represent our views so that they can help change the laws and change what we're doing as a society. And then we have to be able to use those leaders and use our voices in order to change laws, to change culture, which will change laws, and then keep going. And it's not something that's going to be short. It's going to be a long haul movement. We have a clock that's ticking with climate change and with species extinction, so we need to start right now, but we need to keep in mind that we can't get discouraged because, as Donella Meadows was saying, systems resist changes to their paradigms, changes to their assumptions, their design, harder than they resist anything else. And this is not going to be easy, but it's something that's essential. It's something that's truthful, and that was how I came to this work today, was to go through all of this and to be able to articulate to myself that this is the most truthful way to go. And it's the only path, I think, that will get us to this level of prosperity where we're able to take a photo of a sleeping fox and be able to look at that later and to remember and to feel the connection with nature that we really have lost. Thank you.
Okay, well, we have about 40 minutes, I guess, for discussion to follow up. We've got, I think that's really quite an accomplishment in 3 months in a fellowship. And this is all there with us, right from scratch. So, from the ancient cultures to yesterday's municipal bylaws, lots to think about. Actually, I can't help just commenting. I was listening yesterday to a webinar on community land trusts and the local effort to try to create trust structures which will facilitate sharing of access to otherwise inaccessible agricultural land and housing. And I listened last night to Michel Lefebvre talk about the Higgs boson, and he made the point, he made a particular point of a statement by Lord Thomson in 1900, saying, "We now understand physics, nothing is left except better measurement." And Lefebvre made a point, of course, that it was the same year, in fact, that the complete transformation in the paradigm underlying our thinking about the world, about the universe, occurred. And of course, with the Higgs boson, we're seeing further development of the standard model, and lots of expectation that the paradigm may yet shift. I listened last night to Ideas program, in which Thomas Berger was commenting on the recent Supreme Court case, Manitoba Métis Federation. Berger argued that case successfully with the Supreme Court decision a few weeks ago. But he was also the person who argued the Calder case, 1973. From 1973 to 2013, you could argue that some of the fundamental conceptions of the way in which Canadian society operates have changed. The paradigm has shifted in the whole question of the relationship of Aboriginal peoples in Canada with the rest of the society. It is a transformation that is really inconceivable for those who are living in Vancouver in 1950. So I guess what Linda has sketched is a completely unrealistic set of ambitions for a community like us, but maybe it's possible. So I think there's lots of places in which you'll want to pursue the discussion, and I guess you've agreed you'd answer questions.
Yeah, no, I wanted to try to go quickly through it in part, just so we've got till noon, so if people have questions, I'd love to. What do you want to?
Okay, do you want me to? Okay, well, Eli first, and then Michelangelo.
Yeah, I have a question about enforcement and the economic trade-offs that corporations make. When you break a law, you have to pay a fine. Mm-hmm. And if breaking a law and paying a fine is more profitable than following the law and doing the right thing, how do you overcome that problem?
Well, I mean, that gets back to, well, in the States, I think you could deduct the fine in your income taxes too. Yeah. Which just makes it worse. But it gets back to the same problem. I mean, that's just one element of this larger problem, that we've created an economic structure that encourages that type of thing. And, you know, I've been lobbying in the state capital in Sacramento in California for many years. And, you know, the people who I lobby against, you know, the corporate, you know, folks are nice enough, you know, but the system is set up in a way that they're always pushing. And the more power you have, the more power that you'll acquire. And so that type of an example where, you know, fines are low, you know, I mean, they're fighting to keep fines low or non-existent all the time. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've been sort of fighting pollution fines and trying their attempts to get them weaker. Because it's the way that the books are set up. I mean, if you look at, this is a great book, if you're interested, called The Divine Right of Capital. It's fabulous. And she breaks down balance sheets, the author, to show you the way that they account for damages and account for benefits that they might want to do, a corporation might want to do to the environment. Benefits are costs, and if you can get away for a really low fine, that's great, fabulous. Because that's the way the balance sheet is set up. So again, going back to this idea that we need to replace it with something else, you need to be able to articulate what a different balance sheet would look like and how that might actually work, how that might make sense. And that's where sometimes if you can have a community that can model that behavior, people start to see it. So it's not just one thing. It's all of these things are, like you're saying, you know, it's just absolutely unrealistic ambition or something like that. I mean, that's my favorite kind of ambition. So, you know, it's like, it's impossible, great, let's do that. But you have to be strategic about it and understand, and not, you have to play in the world that you live in. So you should say, look, you know, I understand how economic systems work, I understand how balance sheets work. That's one way to do it. Here's another way, let's try that.
Okay, we have one here.
Yes.
One here.
First of all, thank you for this great presentation, and thank you very much for talking about love and care and for challenging our conception of freedom. I think those issues are central in everything we do in modernity. My question is more of a theoretical nature, and I'm not necessarily expecting a clear-cut answer, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, as always. I was reading this essay lately about the logic of emancipation, and what the author was saying is that pre-modernity we usually legitimated social processes on the basis of an external referent, which usually took the form of God or metaphysics. But with the advent of modernity, everything is subsumed under an immanent rationality. Right? So everything is legitimated on the basis of society itself. So I was wondering, when we start talking about the rights of nature, and we are, I think we are implicitly recognizing nature as an agent, as something that has its own logic. In order for that to be effective, does that mean we have to bring metaphysics back in, at least to a certain extent?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not a sociologist, so I can't necessarily speak to the level of detail that you're thinking. But in just sort of listening to what you're saying, I mean, I think we need to go to a next level of evolution in our societal thinking. So when you talk about this idea that this external referent, this idea of God. I mean, for you know, eons, God was something that was important, that was sort of all-controlling. And right before this advent of Western science, this explosion, you know, of Western science, of Galileo and Descartes, etc., people looked to the church, you know, especially, and we're talking just European people, looked to the church, looked to the Pope, looked to their church leaders, and God itself is all-powerful and would take care of things. But then Western science came, and this idea of sort of human reason, human rationality, was something that we transferred our allegiance to, in part because, you know, the church was having its own internal problems, and in part because of the external sources, like the plague was something that was going on, and it decimated people, not decimated, halved the population of Europe, and the church had no control over that. So if science is promising, hey, we can control the earth, the plague was present in every country in Europe until at least the 1700s, for every year, almost every country until the 1700s. And so this idea of, you know, sort of the earth can wipe you out, but science can help you, sure, you know, people are going to transfer their allegiance there. But this idea of human rationality is something that next needs to go. So God went, human rationality as God, it has to go. Because we have this hubris that, you know, we can control things. And when we start to recognize the rights of nature, we have to also let go of this idea that we can control things, that we're in charge. And that's a scary thing to let go. To be able to say that and to sort of, you know, be less attached to this false concept that we can protect ourselves that way. So I would suggest that maybe the next level of awareness would be something, you know, more earth-centric. You know, not that the earth is in charge, but sort of nobody's in charge. And we need to be able to have relationships with each other that reflect that fact. And that allows us as humans to be more responsible for our actions. So science isn't going to save us, we're going to save us through our actions, our virtuous actions, done wisely on a day-to-day basis. So I hope that helps.
I didn't have a question, more of an idea for an answer, and that is to go after the corporate law that states that directors of companies are only addressing their shareholders' needs for profit, and to change that paragraph to a people, community, earth before profit, and that will affect all corporations along the board. and to lobby that fact and to go after that heart of the problem.
Yeah, that's a really, I mean, that's exactly the type of thing that we need to do. And there's organizations like Democracy Now!, for example, that are taking up that type of advocacy to amend, for example, the United States Constitution to say that corporations don't have the rights of people, which is something that's really accelerating the type of effort that you're talking about.
Make the biggest impact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to be able to recognize this idea of sort of maximizing profits for shareholders, yeah, that's something that corporations do, but they don't have to. It's